Detective Julissa Trapp, welcome to Be On.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for coming on. You know, you have one of the most compelling and riveting stories I've had the honor of coming across. And as a detective for the Anaheim Police Department, you personify mental toughness, relentlessness, and being an advocate for the victims and their families that extends beyond professional courtesy. So again, thank you for coming on. Look forward to learning more about your story.
It's very kind of you saying thank you again for having me.
Yeah. So you began your career at the Anaheim Police Department at about 21 years ago, and was a detective for 15 years, and a homicide detective for the past 9 years, which I can't imagine what that's like. Take us back to your early life that led up to your career. Can you share some of the stories and how your journey in law enforcement got started?
Yeah, actually, it was, I was 5 years old and I met a policeman, and I was just fascinated by this superhero. And I wish I knew what his name was, but I remember going home and telling my parents and then telling my kindergarten teacher, when I grow up, I want to be a policeman. And she's like, oh, sweetheart, no, you want to be a policewoman. And I said, no, I want to be a policeman. And I think my parents, you know, I'm a first generation Mexican-American, and they're very traditional. And I think they thought, you know, she's going to outgrow it. And I just never did. I was fascinated with Daryl Gates, and I thought that I wanted to go work at LAPD. And when I became a teenager, I heard about this program called the Anaheim Police Explorers, and it's part of Boy Scouts of America, and it's to help encourage youth to kind of partner with the police department and kind of explore law enforcement to see if that's something that they want to pursue. So I joined the Police Explorers at the age of 15, and that's where I met Rick Martinez, who's one of my mentors and who literally saved my life, I think. And I started kind of being exposed to law enforcement. You know, I got to go wear a little uniform and learn my radio codes and go on ride-alongs, and that just solidified my path. Like, there was no stopping me.
So what was it about the cop at 5 years old that made your mind think superhero? What was it about that experience where you just
I think he was
up?
just to me, he just looked like a superhero. I mean, it's Superman. I mean, it was just the way he carried himself, the fact that he took the time and knelt down and said, you know, because we had been victims of a burglary. And, you know, I was devastated. And, you know, it's an invasion of your privacy, and you feel like you're no longer safe. And then this van shows up, and it's just like, everything's okay now. And it was just that moment, I was just, I guess, starstruck, and just like, when I grow up, I want to be him. I want to be a policeman.
Was there anybody in your family that was part of law enforcement before that?
No.
So you're first generation.
I'm the only one in my family who has pursued law enforcement up to this time. I mean, I'm sure there's going to be more that are joining me. At least I hope. But yeah, there was just no stopping me. My parents thought, like, oh, she's going to outgrow it, and I just never did.
Did your parents ever say, do I know this girl?
You know, I think they were just kind of like, where is this coming from? And they knew that I had this experience, and I think, you know, their dream was for their little girl to get married and have lots of kids and be a stay-at-home mom, and, you know, just kind of follow that path. And it just wasn't mine.
Wasn't your path. It's like meant to be.
I think so.
Because your focus has never relented. It's just like from 5 years old, you just kept on that path, which is really impressive. Most people at 5 don't know what they want to be, or they think they do, and then it's...
Plus, I got that whole stubborn Latina thing going, so don't tell me I can't do something, because I'm just going to prove you that I can, for sure.
Right, that's good, I like it. So you patrol the streets and solve crimes on the same geography you grew up in, that represent the most personal memories. So how has this shaped your approach and motivation to doing your job as a detective or as a patrol officer?
Well, I think the fact that I grew up in Anaheim, I'm invested in the city, and, you know, I genuinely care about what happens in the city and to the citizens of the city, because I've watched, you know, crime go up and down, and, you know, I firmly love the city of Anaheim. I continue to live in the city because I do genuinely care about it, and it's the community that I've always kind of grown up with, and I think that also kind of gives me a little bit extra, because I am invested, and I do want it to see and to be a safe place for people to come and visit. So I think that's definitely helped me. And you know, I've seen crime go up and down, and right now, you know, the the problem that we have with homelessness is definitely something that makes me sad. I've seen our beautiful city turn into something you don't want to look at. So
right, it's a tough problem. You remind me of a saying that the pig is involved and the chicken is committed when you go to sit down for breakfast, right? And
right.
So you're really committed to Anaheim and what's going on there, and that's a special gift as well, because a lot of people could just talk a good talk, but to have that visceral feeling, and I think it's going to parlay into some of the questions we have in this interview. I think it's sort of cropped into other parts of your job, that commitment, that passion of what you're doing. It's really inspirational. So what were some of the experiences as a rookie patrol officer when you're first getting you're cutting your teeth on this,
right.
That really forged the way you approach your job?
Well, I mean, I think when I first came on, I was 21 years old. You're not married. I had a pretty good life, and then all of a sudden you get thrown out into the streets, and you go to a call of a domestic violence, and you got a couple that's bickering back and forth, and they want you to solve their life problems in 5 minutes, and,
right.
and you think to yourself, wow, I'm 21 years old. I don't know what I'm doing in my life right now, but all of a sudden you have to be the savior that solves people's, whether it's parenting, marital, or you name it. People are in distress, they call the police, and then you
right.
show up and they expect you to solve it.
Right.
I think one of the funniest experiences I had is I was on my own, and it was the first week that I was out, and I actually go to a park where that was known for drug activity, and I see this old gangster kind of hype. He's in the park. It's clearly after curfew. I go up and stop him, and I get out of the car and I go to make a stop. And he looks at me and he's like, "Oh, honey, do your parents know you're out? Isn't it past your curfew?" And I thought, haha, real funny guy, and
right.
all of a sudden, he got the different side of me where it was like, hey, sit down.
Right.
And then I learned very quickly that I needed to use my verbal skills, because I'm not a big girl. And so my negotiation skills, my verbal skills were going to be what was going to keep me, not only safe,
right.
but also make me effective out in the street.
Right.
And then another one was I actually had a call. One of my partners got sent to relieve another patrol officer. We were guarding a homicide scene. And I remember going to ask my partner if he needed anything, like a restroom break or lunch. And I remember seeing the homicide team, and it was a reference a girl that was buried out in a canyon. And I remember the homicide detectives walking in and out of this canyon because it was she had been buried for about 2 months. And so it was taking a while for them to excavate her. And I just remember watching them thinking like, wow, that's what I want to do. I want to be a homicide detective, and that vision was forever ingrained in my memory of that. There's this poor girl who's been missing for 2 months, and now they just found her buried in a shallow grave, and now it's their responsibility to not only bring her home, but to find out what happened to her. And I thought, what an immense responsibility these people have, and I just knew at that moment that's what I wanted to do.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So when you thought about going to homicide, you applied for it and was turned down 4 times, which blows my mind away, by the way. But that's usually the story of a lot of very successful people, right? What gave you the fortitude to never give up on this dream?
The first time I put in, you sometimes thank your maker for unanswered prayers, because it did make me seek other things in the department that eventually made me better.
More rounded for the role?
Much more well-rounded. When I first applied, I was in sex crimes, and I had received advice from a lieutenant who had worked in homicide before. I had talked to him and said, this is what I want to do. And he says, well, you got to work the precursors. You either got to work family crimes, you think about it, domestic violence, that's a lot of our homicides come from that. Sex crimes, you really learn how to talk to people in sex crimes, or you got to work gangs. He's also pick one of those 3 and work them. Well, I took that very literally, and I actually worked all 3.
Right.
But when I first applied, I was in sex crimes, and I thought I was ready. And my superiors thought, no, not so much. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to keep pushing forward. And I've never been someone that takes no for an answer. As a matter of fact, I think it's one of the things that sometimes gets held against me, because they said, like, does she ever take no for an answer? No.
Right.
No. Okay, you're putting a barrier. I'm just going to find another way to go around it. So,
right.
Yeah. So it's I don't know if it's just something that's in me. I think I get that stubbornness from my mother, and it's definitely helped me in this line of work.
Sure. So how much of the no was related to being a female versus competence? Was there a paradigm with the men that's machismo or homicide? Or is it really honestly like get more well-rounded, get more experience, and then absolutely? Or was there kind of a combination of things going on?
I don't think it had anything to do with being female. Anaheim Police Department has been nothing but great to me. So we don't have a lot of females. We only make up 8% of the department. But that has nothing to do with how women are treated. I think that definitely happened in generations before me. But I've never felt myself be treated differently just because I happen to be female. I think if you work hard and you show that you're effective, there is no difference. Right. I think personality, I think, played a part in it. I am a little rough around the edges, and homicide, you work as a team, and you spend a lot of hours together. And I think that when people don't know me, I can come across a little brusque. And so I think the first couple of times, it was more the team going like, no, we don't want her. Not because I was female, just like, she just seems a little, no, we don't want her for the team.
Right.
But I was just like, okay, I'm just going to keep working. I'm just going to keep chipping away, and I'm going to show you that I can be an asset to the team. So the first time I got turned down, I think I needed more time.
Yeah.
I went to gangs, and, I got to chase Little Spooky around for, 3.5 years. It definitely made me a better detective, because I went from sex crimes, where I was used to talking to individuals that were committing heinous crimes against little kids, to now talking to gang members. Right. And it's a whole different mindset. And so by the time I got to homicide, I was effective at talking to all sorts of people that walk the planet. So. Right,
that's phenomenal. So in sex crimes, you won Detective of the Year. Congratulations.
Thanks.
And in gangs, your partner rode with you in silence for weeks, initially never fully accepting you. How did you break through the barrier to become good friends?
He and I argue about this. I say that he didn't talk to me for a month. He says it was a week. I think we've kind of split it and said it's 2 weeks. I came from sex crimes, and it's not a traditional move to go from a sex crime detective into gangs. And so I think, he just thought that, why did they pick this girl to come to gangs? Like, what does she know about gangs? And so I actually grew up in Anaheim, and so I knew a lot of the people because I'd gone to school with them that had become gang members. And so all of a sudden he starts realizing, like, oh, maybe she does know a thing or two about gangs. And we worked together in gangs for 2 years, and then he went to homicide before I did, and then I later joined him in the unit, and so we worked homicide together, and now he's my boss. Wow. So, and
full circle almost.
Yes, yeah. And I consider him a very good friend.
So finally, in your 5th try, and again, I just admire your just determination, because a lot of people quit after 1 or 2 dingers, right? They get rejected and they give up, fold the pup tent. So, but you got into homicide and won Detective of the Year, which is awesome. Yet you didn't feel instantly accepted. So, why do you think that was? I mean, you're Detective of the Year. You're doing all the right things. What does it take to get accepted at that point in your career? What do you have to do?
Well, I think I definitely am accepted now.
Sure.
I'm very driven and I'm very focused. Sometimes I think that, I don't have time for, I guess, feelings. When I show up on a homicide scene, it's like I have a job to do, and I know that I'm already, I don't know how many hours behind the suspect. So I'm just kind of real focused, and that can rub people the wrong way sometimes. And so I think at the beginning, it's just kind of like, what is she all about? And then once you start spending 48 hours with people, you get to know one another. And,
Sure.
the same people that thought, no, she's not cut out for this job are now like, some of my closest confidants.
Yeah.
So
through your time in homicide, you developed several nicknames. One is Hurricane Julie, referring to the force you become in the thick of a case. So What drives your energies and passions in solving a homicide case?
You know, you are entrusted with investigating the death of a human being. And there's one thing I've learned is that it doesn't matter who's lying on the ground. They all have families, and they all cry the same, and they all miss their loved ones the same.
Right.
And I learned very quickly that it doesn't matter who is the person that's lying on the ground. They all get the same attention, the same drive. So it doesn't matter if it's an 8-year-old little girl. It doesn't matter if it's a little spooky, because they both have families that love them and miss them, and it's not what happened to them isn't right.
Right.
I'm very religious. I'm Catholic. I believe only one person can decide when your life should end on this earth, and it certainly isn't the person that pulled the trigger or that stuck him with a knife. I take that responsibility very seriously, and so I like meeting my victims' families. I like getting to know them. I think that's what gives me drive. I think that's what gives me the fortitude to keep pushing forward when I'm tired, when I'm sick. I think about that mother crying, and I think about how they're missing their loved one on Christmas and Thanksgiving. And you realize that for them, it's this huge open wound when it initially happens. And it's the worst thing that you could do is show up on someone's door and tell them that their loved one's not only gone, but been murdered. And you just see that pain, and you know that it's awful, and that big open wound that you just left them will heal, but it'll forever be a scar. Right. It doesn't matter how much time goes by. And, I like to send messages on the anniversaries of deaths and birthdays. And sometimes I feel bad and I think to myself, oh, maybe I shouldn't remind them. And then you think to yourself, they never forget. And so that is one of the reasons why I like to keep my victims up on a wall so that they're ever present and never forgotten.
It's amazing because I think a lot of detectives, and I don't want to generalize because I don't know your world, I don't know detectives, but there's a perception, persona that a lot of them put up protective walls against the evil, because how do you deal with it? How do you deal with it day in and day out, what you see humanity do to one another? And yet you're willing to invest and take a deep dive into these people's lives, walk that pain with them, get intimately involved, call them year after year. I also read that you obviously call them on birthdays and anniversaries. You have a cork board with each of the victims' pictures with a rosary. That's unique. That's high touch. That's uncommon in my experience of stories I've read and how people deal on a detective side with crime. So beyond the fact that you're connecting, what drives that approach? Because you're sort of tailoring to the victim what's gone on, and you're investing in a very deep, real way, which most people to deal with it just. Maybe they go to the bottle. Maybe they just arm's length, and I don't want to deal with humanity, but I'll just solve the cases as if it's just a person or a number. But you take personal interest. So what about you drives that part of your approach to your job?
It actually started with my third homicide. It wasn't very easy to solve, and I knew who had done the crime, but I just had to prove it. And it took me about 11 months, and I actually became very good friends with the sister of the victim. I'm still good friends with her now. And I was very frustrated, and I didn't know what to do, and I felt like I was missing something. And I remember just, being raised Catholic, my grandmothers prayed the rosary a lot. And it's a form of meditation, and it's kind of a way to clear your mind. And so I remember picking up a rosary and just going to my church, St. Boniface, and I wanted to think about David and his life and kind of almost reach out to him like, buddy, you need to help me. If you can hear me, I need some kind of guidance. And so I just started praying a rosary for him, and it just kind of started from there. And now, anytime I pick up a new case, I pick up a rosary. I pray a rosary for my victims within 24 hours of their death. And I continue to use that rosary during the investigation. And then when it's over, I give it to the family, whether they're Catholic or not. They all seem to appreciate it. And then the letting go of it is also, I think, a little bit symbolic for me. It's just like, I've done all I can do for you. I need to let you go because I need to pick up somebody else, and unfortunately. But it is. I think it's a way for me to clear my mind and meditate and kind of stay one with my Maker and hopefully get guidance.
Have you gotten insights when you've done the prayer of the rosary, when you talk to the victims from the great beyond? Is that giving you some breakthroughs?
I think I do. I keep a notebook next to my bed because, as a homicide detective, your mind is always spinning, especially when you're working a fresh case. And so I'll wake up in the middle of the night and I'm like, oh, I got to jot down this idea. And I learned that because, or if not, you don't sleep. So it's just kind of a way to kind of get that in my head, and it's there on paper in the morning, so I won't forget it. So no, I think they help. So I was talking about the case that I went to when I was a new patrol cop, and when I went to homicide, one of the questions I asked the senior guy there was, "Hey, whatever happened to the girl that was buried out in the canyon?" And he says, "Oh, it's unsolved." And
Really?
I said, "Really?" I'm like, "Oh, that's terrible." And so for the first 7 years in homicide, I worked fresh cases. For the last 2 years, my boss has made a decision that I'm going to work cold cases. And one of the first things, we had to kind of strike a deal because I was dead against it. I need to be connected to my cases. I need to be there, see the scene, meet the family. So I didn't know if I would be effective in working cold cases. And so I said, that's fine. I'll go against my wishes, but I'll go. But I get to pick my cases. And he's like, well, we'll talk about it. He's like, you get to pick two. So I eventually picked up a case, and the first one I picked up was her.
Wow.
And the very first thing I did is I went and went to her burial site, had a conversation with her, picked a rosary for her, and I said, you know what, you've been asleep for way too long. It's time for you and I to work together. And this year I ended up solving the case.
Wow. Remarkable.
Yeah, but
Wow.
I think she helped.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know what to say. That's just that's just such a remarkable thing to do, and to care that level, and to care that deeply. It's kind of refreshing in today's age where everything's so transactional, and on the most important aspects of life, death, and by murder. Very powerful. So I read where you carry symbolically missing persons inked on your skin, 4 small blackbirds, swallows, birds that carry souls. What do these birds and what does it represent to you? These tattoos, if you will.
Unfortunately for me, the dream that my mother had of me getting married and having children was not going to be a reality. I did get married, and I desperately wanted to have children. And I tried for a really long time, and we actually spent a small fortune trying to have kids. And there was a great IVF doctor here in Newport, and he got me the closest that I had ever been, but unfortunately I would get pregnant and then I would miscarry at about 10 weeks, 8 weeks. And so to me, they're still my little angels, and I hope to meet them in heaven one day. And so each bird is a child that I had and wasn't able to bring to the world.
Okay. I think you will meet them.
I think so too.
Absolutely. One of your favorite expressions is no crying in homie.
Right.
Yeah?
Yeah.
With every murder, you have to strike the balance between caring and coldness to solve the case. I mean, you've got to be a hunter-killer at some levels with some of these people. Yet you work from a very personal connection to the victims that would eat up most homicide detectives, I would imagine. Where do you think this strength comes from to be able to do that and live in that grief and that sorrow and that ugliness that represents murder and homicide?
When I couldn't have children, I had a really tough time. And I remember having conversations with my maker saying, I don't understand why I can't do the one basic thing I'm meant to do. And then I realized, after trying to fight it for so long, that I'm doing exactly what he intended for me to do. I would not be able to be as efficient as a homicide detective if I was a mother. One or the other would have suffered for sure, especially because I'm 100%. I don't like to do anything halfway. So I would have been a phenomenal mother, and I'm not able to do that, and so I give all my energy now to my victims. And so I feel like this is my calling, and I owe it to them to always give them my best.
Wow, that's powerful. So in 2013, what was happening on the streets of Orange County was pure evil. Women were being grabbed and their bodies dumped on local landfills. And in 2014, you inherited a case where you discovered the 20-year-old Jarre, mangled body in a trash sorting plant in Anaheim. In fact, you promised Jaree's mother you would find the killer, which is pretty bold. Given the high percentage of cold cases and homicide that don't get solved, what were you going through, or what was going through your mind when you made this promise? And do you ever consider that you might not be able to deliver on the promise?
Let me just put it this, I would not do it again. The desperation in that mother's voice, and Jody is very high maintenance, and she was very upset, and rightfully so. Sure. I mean, she's in another state. She can't meet with me, and I think when you meet someone, you get a certain connection to them. We're talking on the phone. She wants answers. I can't give them to her, and I just remember telling her, you just got to have a little bit of faith in me. I can't tell you everything right now. I have to protect the case. I promise you. It just kind of flew out. I said, I promise you. And here's the thing. I would not have rested until I found out what had happened. I would have died still, gone to the grave, still trying to figure out what had happened to those girls. It just kind of flew out of my mouth, and next thing you know, I told her, I said, I promise you, I will find out what happened. And did I think that there's a possibility that wasn't going to happen? Of course.
Sure.
But I think that was just extra drive to get the job done.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, it's true of a goal, right? I'm going to do this. You tell people you're going to do it. You now have some accountability.
It's there.
Not that I think you need that, because you're really good at what you do. But within 20 days of starting the investigation on this case, you connected the dots of the missing women to 2 sex offenders, and you were staring at a serial murder case. What was going through your mind at that point? I mean, 20 days into it, you start to realize, wait a minute, there's a pattern, there's multiple women involved, and it looks to be a serial murder in Orange County, of all places.
I mean, I was shocked. When you become a homicide detective, you think, you watch the movies and they're serial killers, right? And you realize very quickly, like, the chances of you working a serial cases are actually pretty low. And here I am working, what I think is just the murder of Jaree, and I find myself all of a sudden in the middle of this investigation that involved not only just one serial killer, but 2 working together, which is extremely rare. I had that and some colorful words came out of my mouth moment.
Yeah.
And, I'm not going to lie, the pressure was definitely on. Both of these individuals were wearing ankle monitors, which you think, how bold is that? You're wearing ankle monitors, and yet you're still kidnapping women.
Is it boldness or stupidity, or they just lack of self-control? I mean, you would think, hey, you got monitoring on, so you don't do anything, but where does that come from?
I wouldn't say stupidity, because they were very efficient killing machines for as long as they did it for. What drives them, I still don't know. I don't think I'll ever really know the answer of what happened between those 2 men and what truly drove them to do what they did. But it is pure evil. Yeah. And it was 20 days that I did not sleep, especially once we knew who they were, and we had to build a case, and we had to build a strong case. And so they were out for about 7 days before we actually arrested them. Right. And I don't say this lightly. I did not sleep.
Yeah, no, I could imagine, because you know, right? So part of the process of linking the 2 individuals to the murder was the DNA. What was it like waiting for the match?
It's definitely not like TV. It takes a little bit more than a commercial break to get DNA results back. Right. People think, oh, well, they have all these offenders in this database in the state, and they should be really, quick to get a match. And it doesn't work that way. We had to get what we call a standard, and we had to get it surreptitiously. So we followed these individuals around, eventually had them discard something. And even from there, it takes about 72 hours to get a hit. And that's with the analysts working pretty much around the clock.
Really?
And as DNA gets more efficient, it becomes quicker and quicker. We now have in the county what's called rapid DNA, but that's really only for blood. If there's blood left at the scene, we can normally get a DNA profile now within 24 hours. which is really good. Sometimes the same day, depending what time we send it in. But for the most part, to get a match from a forensic scientist takes about 72 hours.
Does the jury then and the court system look at DNA from blood versus fluids differently? Or if the DNA tech says this is a match, do they accept that, or is it not that simple?
No, they do. With rapid DNA, which is fairly new, we'll get a match. It's enough for us to proceed forward with the case, but then we still send it to the Orange County Crime Lab, and they still do the traditional testing that takes a little bit longer. That's the evidence that ultimately ends up in court.
Okay, because you watch the OJ case and it was
right
handled in such a way you're like, Of course, that was a long time ago, and DNA has really progressed since then.
Oh,
sure.
it's extremely sensitive now,
Yeah.
to the point where we wear masks now, because if you just breathe on something,
You can affect it, contaminate it.
absolutely.
Yeah. So from the time you promised Jaree's mother the outcome, 29 days later, into the case, you found yourself in an 8.5 by 10 room with the suspected killer of 4 women. A psychological duel with more than a confession at stake, trying to learn the fates of these women. What was it like to be in the room with these men, knowing what was at stake?
The pressure was definitely more with Stephen Gordon. Frank Cano had asked for an attorney, and so I knew I wasn't going to get any answers from him. And so by the time Stephen was brought up to the interview room, I knew that he was really my only chance of figuring out, not so much that he had done it, because we knew that they were responsible for killing them, but he was really my only chance of finding out what had happened to these women. Because at this point, yes, we had found Jaree, but we didn't know where Kiana and Josephine and Martha were. And there was a part of me that thought, well, maybe they're buried somewhere. Mm-hmm. It became much more about bringing the women home. I wasn't going to be able to bring them back, but I wanted the families to have the opportunity to say goodbye, closure, give them a proper burial if that's what they decided to do. So it was really more about that. It was the pressure about trying to figure out where the women were.
Yeah.
And it began a 13-hour conversation that, I'll never forget.
Yeah.
I heard some things that, nobody should have to hear.
Was that part of building the case? So if you got the DNA and you have them there because you have the ankle bracelets of where they're moving around and scurrying about like rats, is it about closure for the women, or is it also an important element in developing the case for trial ultimately?
I mean, if Stephen had asked for an attorney, I firmly believe the outcome would have been the same. Yeah. I still think he would have been found guilty. I still feel like he would have been sentenced to death. It really was more about getting answers for the family. That's ultimately what he gave me. Yeah. A lot of people think like, well, what's he like? He's actually, he's got moments where he's very charming, boy next door. He's interesting to talk to. He goes, through little phases where when he's very angry and he's on his rants, you can see the evil. But then, he'll flip the switch, and you could have a cup of coffee with him and have a very good conversation. And I did. Part of that 13 hours, we had lunch, we had dinner, we talked about music, we talked about sports, all of it just to build that rapport to ultimately get him to tell me where the girls were.
It's remarkable. It's almost like Ted Bundy. You heard the same thing where he was charming, he was intelligent, University of Utah, yes. I think masters or whatever. But there's the other side, right? There's that switch. So it's fascinating. So you're in a 13-hour interrogation with this man, but in your department you're considered a master interrogator and have honed and weaponized empathy. I think it's fascinating because guys can go in there machismo and walk in there and have a threatening demeanor and try to threaten it out of somebody, but you took a different tack. So how do you approach interrogations? I mean, these are murderers. These are people that have taken human life. So mentally, what do you do? Not to give away your trade secrets, because you got to, I understand there's some things you want to protect, but generally speaking, how do you think about going into those situations?
A lot of people ask me that, and I tell them, like, who do you tell your deepest, darkest secret to? Who? You tell it to your best friend. And you're not going to tell it to someone who's, barking at you, who's judging you, who's staring you down, who really seems to not have really any care for you, right? You're not going to tell that person. You're going to tell the person that generally seems interested in hearing what you have to say.
Right.
So a lot of my interviews is more listening than actually talking, and really trying to figure out what is it that got them to this place. So I focus not so much on the crime itself, but what led them to that dark spot in their life, right? Ultimately, they've committed a mistake. Some of them have committed the ultimate mistake. But it is a mistake, and most of them are generally remorseful about what they've done. And they want to tell people, hey, look, this is what got me here, and I'm so sorry I did it. And they want to explain. I think people generally want to confess. They just need the right avenue to do it.
Right.
And they need to do it at their own time. You can't rush a confession. You have to be willing to sit there and talk to someone and hear their story in order for them to tell you what you need. A lot of people make the mistake of talking too much in an interview, and sometimes silence is golden. And when you sit in a room, when you sit across from someone and you're just in silence, they just start talking. They just do. It's human nature. You want to talk.
Yeah, it's brilliant. It's a brilliant strategy. But yet you're in this room with Stephen,
Yes.
and you decided to go in unarmed and sit close without a barrier between you. And again, this guy's a murderer of 4 women. He had certainly ample opportunity, if he wanted to hurt you and to take 15 or so seconds for someone to come help you. Why take this chance? Why put yourself in that situation?
I don't want them to see me as a police officer. I want them to see me as someone who is, and I do generally care about what they have to say. And so I try not to wear my gun or my badge, because that's just a reminder, that I'm a police officer, and that in itself builds up a barrier between them and myself. So I don't do that. And yes, I sit close, and I realize that one of these days I might get popped in the face, and that's a risk that I'm willing to take. But it's when there's a table between you and the suspect, that's protection.
Sure.
And you're not very vulnerable when there's this table in between us. But if I go and sit next to you, and all of a sudden I'm just right next to you, and I reach out and I touch your hand, I think that people can feel the transfer of energy. And so when I reach out and I touch their hand and I say, hey, look, I really want to hear what you have to say, I think they know that I mean it, that it's true. And I don't think it's that they made good choices, but I do leave every interview and tell them, tomorrow you get to wake up and be a different person if you choose to do that. Right. This doesn't have to define you. You can choose to do better.
What's amazing about you is your mental balance. As I listen to you, and you're seeing these gruesome, grisly scenes and the emotion that wells up. You're dealing with the family and the emotion that wells up. And for some people it could be anger. And then you're dealing with the perpetrator in a way that shows them a lot of grace. And that emotional mental balance is very impressive. Almost like, where'd that come from? I mean, the ability to keep things in perspective and maybe put them in silos for the greater good of figuring out what happened to these women, solve the case, land it for the family, give them some closure. Where'd that come from? Where'd you develop that ability to be all that and do all that and keep it in perspective?
I think it just comes down to how I was raised. And, my father always taught me that you treat everybody with kindness, dignity, and respect, regardless of who they are. Whether it's the guy who, is shining your shoes, or, the priest at church, or the doctor, they're all the same. They're all people, and you treat them all the same. Right. With that grace and that respect.
Hats off to your dad.
And so when I walk into a room with a suspect, it doesn't matter that he's about to tell me that he's been sodomizing an 8-year-old for 3 years, or that he killed 4 women. They got to a place that's very dark, and most of them want to tell you, and they want to do different. Not all, but for the most part. And so they just need to know that there's a safe place for them to say it.
It's almost like if they would have gone to therapy before all this started and had someone to talk to and work through. You almost wonder,
maybe
could that have been helpful? Because you're like the therapist at the end when they made the big mistake, and maybe they have some epiphanies like, just someone who cares, someone to love at some level. Or in other words, you love in the way that you care about their story and what they're going through. Makes me wonder if that would have made a difference. But let's go back to the interrogation with Stephen. Lasted 13 hours.
Yes.
And it's been described as a chess match. So how'd you approach this particular negotiation, given what was in the balance?
You know, I say he controlled the room for the first 11.
What do you mean by that?
For the first 11 hours. He's a master negotiator himself. And so it was a lot of quid pro quo. I will tell you this if you do this for me. And so it was a lot of, okay, Stephen, and not trying to rush him and realizing, okay, I can't push him too far because if he asks for an attorney, it's over. And so for 11 hours, I kind of let him, play his game. And, I shared a lot of personal things and I gained his trust, which I think ultimately helped me when he finally asked me for the ultimate thing he wanted, is that he wanted to see Frank, his co-defendant. And I think the fact that I had not lied to him, the fact that I had been very genuine and open with him, when I came into the room, 11 hours later and, basically did the ultimate bluff and lied to him and told him that Frank didn't want to see him, he believed it and he was crushed. And you could feel the whole energy of the room shift. And it was just like, I finally have control of this room now. And it's, of those 13 hours, you can fast forward to hour 11 because that's where
it shifted.
That's where it shifted.
Wow.
Yeah, that's ultimately where the truth came out.
What kind of toll did this interrogation take on you?
So this rule about no crying in homie, it did not exist that day. I remember.
Why is that?
I think it was just having not slept for 7 days, the pressure of the case, of not letting him escape, and then I'm in this room with an individual who he himself describes that he's beyond evil. And he is. You can feel a little darkness coming from him. You can kind of, I always tell people, every time I'm with him, I feel like he sucks a little bit of my soul out. And so I'm in this room cooped up with him. It's just me and him. And, he tells me what he did to these women. And their last hours on earth were not pleasant. And I won't go into detail about what he did to them, but I had to hear it all, and I had to keep a straight face, and I had to show no judgment. And so when it was finally over, I remember I walked out of the room, and I think it was just, not that I think it was just built up stress and an adrenaline dump. And I remember walking out, and there was an FBI agent that had been sitting there watching the interview, and I walk out, and it just, without even being able to control it, just the flood tears. And all of a sudden I'm mad at myself because there's no crying in homie. And I go to the bathroom and I remember walking out and he's like, nope, you're not done. And so just kind of let it all out. He says, okay, get yourself together. You got, more work to do. And I finally I think I needed that release. So my no crying in homie was violated for about,
But he didn't
60
see you cry.
seconds.
Stephen didn't see you cry.
Gosh, no.
So what's interesting is you're with this guy, and he's talking about what he did to these girls. I think an average person would say, I want to kill this guy. I want to take him out. I mean, the emotion, the anger, and yet that poker face. I mean, how do you do that? Is it what's in the balance? So, hey, we're going to play the role because I need to get the conviction. We need to get this guy where he needs to be. But how do you tamp down on those raw emotions? Because you saw these women and what their demise was like. And you've been living this case, not sleeping for 7 days. So how do you maintain that balance?
I think that I would make a great actress.
Yeah.
It really is. It's.
So you're playing a role.
I'm playing a role.
Yeah.
Whether I'm a mother to that person for that day, a sister, a confidant, whatever it is, I'm definitely playing a role. There's a theme when I walk in, and I study my subjects, and I what are they missing, and that's the niche that I tried to fill for them,
right.
To ultimately get them to open up.
Wow. So take us to the trial. What was the trial like? So you got this confession.
Right.
We're going down this rabbit hole. I think courtrooms are rabbit holes, my experience. But you're now in trial. What was that like?
I didn't know how Stephen was going to be with me because, we had not seen each other since the date of the confession. And, you never know how they're going to react to you. Is he going to be mad? How is he going to receive me? And, I hate to say this, but he's like me. He was very much a professional. He knew that he was defending himself, and he was very focused on his case and getting out the message that he wanted to get out. I know the bailiffs at one point thought that he might try to strangle me during the trial.
Why?
I don't know. I think they just thought...
Was he nearby you?
Oh, yes. So there's his investigator and then Stephen Gordon. And so they quickly realized, though,
Why would they put you that close to him in court?
Well, because the prosecutor sits, I sit with the prosecutor at the prosecutorial table, and then the defense table is right next.
Why, you think they have a little more degrees of separation?
No, it's up and close and personal. And, I think they quickly realized that there's a mutual respect between him and I, and that wasn't going to happen. And during the trial, he wanted to have a lot of one-on-one meetings with me, and a lot of it was like, how do you think I did today? Do you think, I did well with that witness?
He's like a kid that needs affirmation from a parent, almost.
Did
he have formal education? Was he, what was his background?
High school graduate.
Okay, but he's a smart guy.
Very smart,
Yeah.
very smart, very bright. Like I said, I think for what he was able to do, I think he did a phenomenal job at representing himself. And he accomplished what he wanted to accomplish. And so that was very important to him. But it also afforded me the opportunity to bring some closure to some families. I know that Kiana's mother really wanted to know where Kiana last was. And because of the relationship I have with Stephen, I was able to go to him and say, hey, look, the mother wants to know where you guys picked up Kiana. And he was very kind, and he drew me a map, and I was able to take her there. He didn't have to do that. Yeah. So I do thank him for doing that. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I always tell, because I train new detectives now, when you're done with a confession, don't treat your suspect like dirt. Right. You never know when you're going to need to talk to him or her again.
So in essence, that 13 hours was a massive investment that paid off.
Yes.
And really paid off in a big way. So for the audience, let me just sort of give a construct of the trial. So during the trial, Stephen represented himself, which is pretty bold, right? Most people would say, I want the attorney because, the legalese and everything. And he made a surprise decision for the jurors to hear the 13-hour confession. I presume they heard the whole thing?
They did.
God bless them. Was that over multiple days or?
Oh, yeah, I think it took 2 or 3 days for them to hear the whole thing.
So the emotions of the victims' families was palpable, and when he spoke, he said his intention had been beyond evil. Downplay the evidence of the GPS tracks you had on him and the text and the DNA evidence. And he said, take away the interviews with Detective Trapp and me admitting my responsibility. This case is beyond weak, he says. How pivotal is allowing the jurors to hear the interrogation into him being found guilty?
I think the outcome would have been the same without it. I really do. His DNA, the GPS tracks, I don't know where he's talking about that the case is beyond weak. I think he's been watching a little bit too much Law and Order, I don't know, for dramatics, but no, it would have been the same. I actually didn't want the mothers to hear it. Mm-hmm. So it kind of, when the confession was initially thrown out by the judge, I kind of took a sigh of relief because I didn't want them to hear what he had said. He did. Okay. Stephen filed a motion, and he won. So like I said, very bright. And so he actually gave us another confession. On the eve before we were about to start a trial, he gave us a clean version that we could use. And he knew it was sterilized, and that's the confession that the jury first heard. Mm-hmm. And then I get on the stand, and he's questioning me. And I don't know if he's just not getting what he wanted out of me. He wasn't getting the reaction. I don't know. Maybe I prayed a little too hard.
Was it poker face again?
Yes, very much poker face. I'm always very poker face with him. And all of a sudden, he makes a motion to play the 13-hour interview. And I still remember the jury actually going, there's another confession, and it's 13 hours. And I thought they were going to be like, oh gosh, we don't want to sit another 2 days. They couldn't wait to hear it. It was a little sad for me because I knew that the mothers were going to have to hear it. And Stephen was not very kind in describing the women, and I didn't want them to hear everything that had happened to their daughters. Unfortunately, they ended up having to hear it all.
And during that trial, you spent a lot of time with the victims, I understand.
With the families, yes. Yes. All the mothers are just amazing, and I wish there was something I could do for their pain. It's just...
Yeah, it's tough. So you made a promise to yourself as a child that one day you would climb Mount Kilimanjaro, so we're going to change a little bit. Yeah. Africa's tallest peak, and you were the only woman in the group, about 40 in all. What was that experience like?
It's incredible. I cannot describe the power of that mountain. There's definitely a reason why people are drawn to it. It's just this massive mountain out in the middle of Africa. It's like literally like God just set this mountain down. It's all by itself, and they say animals are drawn to it, and I can see why. You go from basically a jungle to Arctic, and it's hard to describe. It's something you just need to witness. It's magical, and I've never felt so close to God than on top of that mountain. Maybe because I'm at 19,000.
Yeah, that'll do it. Did you need oxygen?
I did not. No,
wow.
No.
Seriously impressive.
Yeah, it was incredible.
So what in your wildest dreams, what got you to, was that one of your bucket lists? I'm going to go climb Mount Kilimanjaro?
I have no...
Because there's some training involved in that.
I actually have no idea what my 8-year-old self was thinking. All I know is that I have this report, and it's me, 8 years old, saying when I grow up I want to climb Kilimanjaro. I have no idea where I heard about Kilimanjaro. Definitely not from the Mexican telenovelas that my mother was watching. And I just remember picking it up and going, oh, well, hey, she wanted to climb Mount Kilimanjaro, so I kind of owe it to her. So yes, there was a lot of training involved, a lot of hiking.
How many months before? I mean, how many months?
I started about a year prior. Okay. Not only gathering all my gear, but preparing to do these long, hiking days. And you're talking about a woman who had literally been only camping once before in her life.
Massively impressive. I mean, 19,000 feet, the oxygen level in your blood is, I was talking to a colleague, and he was at 12,000 feet, and there was an endurance athlete that was they have this thing called SaO2, saturation of arterial oxygen. Mm-hmm. And he said, the guy was about 92, but he was an athlete. He was a triathlete. He goes, most people were 80, 76. This is at 12,000 feet, so you're at 19,000 feet.
Yeah.
That's some serious training that went into it.
You think you can train for 19,000 feet. You don't. You still get pretty lightheaded, and you don't stay up there very long. Sure. I think we were on the summit for about 30 minutes, and the best way to describe it is being on like a stair climber and only being able to breathe through a straw. That's how little air you feel like you're getting when you're on the summit. But the views, you can't beat that view.
Yeah. Europe, jets are flying.
Oh, yeah.
Well, they fly 36, but yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah.
So what's interesting is, you obviously like these marathon sessions, whether it be 13-hour interrogations, but you're climbing up to 14 hours per day, and you'd watch as helicopters would take the weak and unlucky off the trip, right? So that's got to be a psychological component. Did you ever think you would end up in one of those helicopters?
What's funny is the last day, the day before we summited, and they told us, we're only going to call a helicopter if it's like a life and death situation.
Right.
Normally, they'll try to walk you down the mountain, or they'll put you in basically like a cot with wheels and try to wheel you down. Mm-hmm. So for them to call a helicopter something very serious. Yeah. Well, the day that we're preparing to summit, I'm seeing all these helicopters, and I'm like, what is going on? And I had seen a lot of people that were younger than me, looked much more athletic, coming off the mountain, turning around. They didn't make it. And they almost looked catatonic, just this ashy white.
Yeah, they got no oxygen.
And I remember thinking, like, am I gonna do this? And All I could say is I think it's that same stubborn and drive that I have. There was nothing that was going to prevent me from making to the top of that mountain. Coming down, however, was a different story. I think I told one of the porters at one point, like, just leave me here. I'm just going to die. And it's like, it's that lack of oxygen that's, going in your brain and everything. Like, it's okay. Just leave me in a cave. I'll be fine. I'm ready to go see my maker now. And then he's like, no, you're going to be fine. Just keep walking. And I'm like, okay. Them fully knowing, as soon as we can get her back down to 15,000 feet, I'll be better. But yeah.
Did they have oxygen bottles just in case if you needed?
They do.
Yeah.
But no, we didn't get any. It was like, suck it up,
So it's one thing to look like you're in shape, but it's a different thing to prepare for that event. And be prepared. So, a year you took to prepare.
Yeah, a lot of hiking. We did Half Dome, did the cables, did a lot of, local hikes. Carry my pack that, weighed about 25 to 33 pounds, preparing for it. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Now, when you're climbing up, did you carry a pack on your back?
I did, yes.
And what was the weight?
33.
Even doubling.
Wait, no, I take it back. No, mine was 23. 23 pounds because of the water that you have to carry,
Sure.
and then the extra layer of clothing. The porters, God bless them, they carry your 33-pound bag that has like your sleeping bag, and so they'll get you from one camp to the next camp. And you think 33 pounds, it's not a lot. When you're trying to pack for a week on a mountain, and you're restricted to 33 pounds, that's not a lot of clothes. So
no.
You're talking about I'm a girly girl. So to not shower for 8 days, that was very difficult.
Welcome to the SEALs, right?
Right.
So this was a 6-day journey. So on the 6th day of climbing, you ascended through the air and snow and stood on the western steppe in a place called Masai, called the House of God. What went through your mind at that moment? Just when you reached the top, you achieved that goal, your 8-year-old self was like, we're going to do this. Mm-hmm. What was that like?
You can't describe it. There is something about that mountain that is spiritual. I know why the Maasai call it the House of God. You feel it when you step onto that summit. There is just something magical about that peak, where you do feel connected. At least I did, to my maker. And I just remember looking up at the sky and saying, thank you that I made it. And it's just one of those things where I feel like if I did this, nothing's going to stop me. Yeah. I could do this, I could do something else. I could do anything. So it's definitely a gift that I gave to myself and to that 8-year-old little girl, that you put your mind to something, you do it. Yeah. One of my biggest things that I tell myself is you die with memories, not dreams. So
I like that.
Don't wait around for things to happen. You go make them happen. And
that's a great quote.
Yeah.
That's a book. I always say that's a great quote. So how did that experience change how you see your job as a homicide detective? Climbing Mount Kilimanjaro, did it give you more energy, more determination, or just a different perspective on God and his connection to humanity?
I think it's definitely, it's like anything else. A barrier is there, a rock is there, it doesn't matter. It might take you a little bit longer. You just walk around it. You go around it, you find a friend to help you move it. No is not an answer. Right. It's just no, maybe not right now. Maybe you got to look for a different way to do it. But you just keep pushing forward. That's awesome.
So what advice would you give your 25-year-old self, knowing what you know today?
Oh. I think I would just say, patience. I think if I could have learned a little bit sooner not to be so rough around the edges, I think some things would have been a little easier. So I would definitely tell her to have more patience. Right. Things are going to come in due time, and take a moment to sometimes explain yourself to people, because we're at a different generation now, where a lot of people want to know why, and I'm very used to, I told you to do something, just go get it done.
Get it done, right?
Yeah, and so
different generation, yeah.
Yes.
Get it, yeah.
So I think I would tell her, take some time to explain to people. It's going to be a little easier if you do.
Right.
Yeah.
Get their buy-in that way. So who's that person that's had the most influence on your life? It's a remarkable life, by the way, but who's that person that you think back in your time that's like that one person just had the biggest pivoting influence or impact on your life?
Be hard to do just one. There's two great men who have made me and put me where I am, and that is my father and Rick Martinez, the police officer that was my Explorer advisor, who saw me going down a wrong path and had the caring to say, "Hey kid, come back, refocus." And he was the one that told me, are you going to apply to be a police officer? I had just turned 21. I thought there's no way they're going to hire me. And he's like, just apply. What do you got to lose, kid? And I said, you know what, sir, you're right. And I found myself the next month going to the police academy and graduating at 21 years old. And then ultimately, my father, who has instilled in me my morals and my values. And he's my best friend.
Nice.
He's the one that has taught me not to judge anyone,
Right.
because you never know what they've gone through. I love him to pieces. And he's the man that, like, if I did something terrible, I could go home right now and he would take me in his arms and he'd be like, Mija, okay, you screwed up, but tomorrow you'll do better.
How powerful is that?
Yeah.
To have that kind of loving dad. Julissa, thanks for sharing your story.
Thank you for having me.
No, I'm touched by it. I'm impressed. Your character, your high touch with victims, just everything about you just rings so authentic, and it's so powerful to hear this story in today's age of someone who's really devoted to the right thing. So thank you so much for sharing your journey and being so inspirational to everybody on the Beyond audience.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you again.
Thanks.